När ett barn blir allvarligt sjukt behöver du hantera en ny vardag. Men det finns stöd att få. Ronald McDonald Hus ger familjer möjligheten att bo tillsammans medan barnet vårdas på sjukhus. Vill du ge fler familjer samma möjlighet? Swisha till 970 22.
We live beyond your modern man and all his justifications for his world of progress. And though he has created his alibis by falsifying history, by smearing what was left of our name, by insinuating poisonous myths in the minds of our peoples, by proclaiming himself sovereign at the crossroads of ideologies. This, his modern civilization, is not superior. It is not enlightened, nor privileged.
I chose a different intro to today's episode because I thought it suited today's subject and guest. And the song, or recital rather, is from the one-man band Rome, which is one of my favorite bands. And the song is from one of Rome's most anti-modern albums, The Lone Furrow. The theme, that modernity and its cult of progress is a dead end, runs through much of what Paul Kingsnorth, today's guest, has written and said. He has a background as a journalist, but in 2009 he started the Dark Mountain Project that saw environmental collapse as inevitable and criticized the whole notion of progress. He left the project in 2017 and has since written a non-fiction book called Confessions of a Recovering Environmentalist about this period in his life. He's also a novelist whose work include The Wake and Beast, and his latest novel is called Alexandria. And I must recommend his Substack newsletter called The Abbey of Misrule. But today we talk about a fantastic essay he wrote a couple of years ago called The Cross and the Machine, published in First Things. It's also been translated into Swedish and published by Tidskriften Pilgrim. In this essay, he tells the story of how he went from being a Dawkins-esque atheist as a youth to an environmental activist, on to zenbhuddhism, landing in a witch-coven. Yes, he was a witch for a while, and we talk about that. Until he realized that what he was searching for was Christ, Christianity, an answer he didn't want to receive, but it nevertheless came to him. And we also talk about what the machine in the title of the essay, what that is, and how to keep oneself from not being swallowed by it. But now on to today's guest. I'm Ivar Arpi, and you're listening to Rak Höger. Welcome, Paul Kingsnorth, to Rak Höger.
Thanks for having me on.
So it's a great delight to have you on. And I found you, like you're writing a long time ago, and you were involved with the Dark Mountain Project. And I'm not sure if I was serious enough to really understand what you guys were doing, or if I just felt that the name was really cool because I like fantasy and stuff. So it's a Dark Mountain Project. That sounds really cool. I have to look into this. But then I think it's like 10 years ago or maybe more that I saw you guys, and you started in 2009. Mm. And then I just recently came across an essay you wrote, which I then sent to terrorized all my friends with. Like, read this. This is great. This is great stuff, guys. And that's called The Cross and the Machine. And that was basically, it's a self-biographical story about how your spiritual journey and the Dark Mountain Project is in there as well, and where you came from and where you ended up. So we're gonna focus a little bit on that essay. And it's also came to my knowledge by a friend of mine, Joel Halldorf, that his father was a great admirer of yours, and he had translated and published that essay in Swedish. So I'll put the link to the Swedish version as well in the show notes. So I'm just going to begin because it's a very very funny introduction in start of the text. It begins in empty churches and in defiance, and at the age of 15 you visit one such pretty empty church with your schoolmates, and in the guest book that they had, you write, "I will destroy you and all of your works, ha ha ha," and then sign it Satan. And a few days later you write that you came back with your friends and you did it again, and you wrote, "Die Nazarene, victory is mine." And when I read this, I laughed out loud, and I just felt that could have been me and my friends at that age, and I think many others in Sweden or England. And on the one hand, it's youthful mischief, but on the other hand, it's not clear why the church is such an obvious object of that mischief in at least in Sweden and England. So I just wanted to begin to ask you, if you have an answer to why that is, now that you're a few years older than 15 now?
Yeah, isn't it interesting? I felt like I should begin that essay with a bit of a confession. So at least I've got it off my chest now. I mean, I think you're right. That's it's a teenage thing. But yes, I mean, I think that the answer probably is that certainly back then, this is in the 1980s, the church was, I mean, it didn't, in England, certainly I don't know what it was like in Sweden, but in England, the church didn't really have any power or very much influence in the 80s, but it was still seen as the source of moral authority, or it was supposed to be. So rebelling against the church was a bit like rebelling against your dad if you were a teenage boy. It was a thing you were supposed to do if you were pushing back against authority. And the church for so long in the Western world, for 1,000 years, has represented moral authority, or is supposed to have represented moral authority anyway. And now that I'm older and I look back on that, especially with the writing I've been doing over the last few years, I've been trying to dig into the question of why so much of our society seems to be coming apart and modernity seems to be hitting the buffers in different ways. And I think it seems to me now that the whole process of becoming modern in the Western world, going through the Renaissance and the Enlightenment and moving into the age of reason, science, humanism, that's really a rebellion against religion. It's really a rebellion against the human attachment to the divine, which is something that all human cultures have had forever, as far as I can see. And it's really only in the modern West that we've tried to build a culture that doesn't have a divine center to it. And so if we're in rebellion against religion, and I think we're in rebellion against our previous moral authority, then that means in the West that we're primarily in rebellion against Christianity, because that's our founding religion. And I don't think we know that. I just think it's a thing that's in the background all the time. So certainly when I was growing up, the church was just a sort of slightly toothless thing. I mean, I wouldn't have done that in the visitor book if I thought I was going to get punished. I just knew that the church was
your hand chopped off.
There was going to be no trouble.
Like
I was not going to be burned at the stake because the church was already basically weak. So it was just a silly thing we did, and it wasn't, as you know, we weren't thinking it through. It wasn't a rebellion. It was just us being stupid. But as I say, because the church was our founding moral authority, then when we rebel against our founding authority, or we rebel against our traditions, or we just think we're rebelling against God, then we take that on the church, really. And I think also that the founding myth of modernity, and there's truth to the myth, is that the church has been a very repressive institution, and we're much better off freed from it and using our human reason as individuals to build lives for ourselves so that we don't have to live under this irrational, abusive authority. And as I say, I mean, it's a simplified story, but there's also, you know, we had hundreds of years of wars of religion in the West, and modernity was at least in part a reaction to those. So I think it's all of that sort of stuff bundled up, and we're the generation that has just almost thoughtlessly just sort of walked away.
Yeah. And one thing, I didn't know this until I read a book by David Thurfjell. He's a scholar of religion, and he wrote a book like the call from the wasteland. It's called. Unfortunately, it's not translated into English, but it's great. You have to take my word for it. And he grew up in the Swedish church, but he's left it. So he's basically done the opposite trajectory of yours. But he's not this triumphant atheist or anything like that. But when he was studying Muslims in Iran and their mystics, a mystical sect within that tradition, and then he felt lonely after he was doing his doctoral thesis on them and their tradition, and he felt lonely, and because he was not part of their tradition, so he visited a church, and it was an Anglican church, and the liturgy is very similar to Swedish, and so it's many of the same prayers, it's the same psalms, so he immediately felt a connection to home because of the smells, the sights, and everything. And also, I didn't know that, but if you're an ordained priest in the Anglican church, you can also come to the Swedish church and vice versa. So it's very close. And one of the things when you characterize the two kinds of vicars in the Anglican church, it felt like it could have been just the Swedish church that I grew up and mocked, and it was the stuffy old vicar or the stuffy old priest who seems like a conservative, hopelessly out of touch with everything that's modern, or had never heard a punk song or hip hop song in my case, because I was a teenager in the 90s, and then it's the hip version who's very, very in tune, but tries to have Christ within it. So it's Jesus Christ. He's my homeboy, guys. He's my homeboy.
Exactly.
That kind. And you felt not. It did neither of them really helped you feel a connection to the church. And I'm a confirmed Christian, and the only reason I did the thing, I was 15 or 14. The only reason was that I wanted the gifts. So I was like, I had to leave church because I fell asleep. I was such a pain in the ass to everyone, and I had no bad conscience about it at all at the time. It just felt right.
Yeah, I mean, I had the same thing.
So, but those two kinds, yeah.
No, I was saying I wasn't brought up in a Christian household or anything, but I had to go to chapel at school, and I got dragged to church on various occasions, and it's exactly that. It's just, you just sit there and you think, what am I doing here? No one ever explains to you what you're doing there, really. It's just, no. And it felt, the thing is, back then, and doubtless for you too, it just felt like it had already died. It didn't feel like it was relevant to anybody, and even the people who were going along didn't seem particularly committed to it. I mean, I'm sure some of them were, but it felt it was a ritual. It was an empty ritual at that point. Certainly, my experience of it was that, anyway.
Yeah, and you went from in your teenage years, you developed into what you describe as a Dawkins-esque teenage atheist. So, what did that entail in your in the Paul Kingsnorth edition?
It basically entailed me being an idiot. I mean, it just entailed me thinking I was very clever at the age of about 18, and imagining that nobody had ever heard my clever arguments against the existence of miracles and resurrections and gods and the rest of it, and just winding up anyone I knew who was religious. Not just Christian, and my best friend at the time was Muslim, actually, so I would wind him up too. But that's interesting, because I think I wrote about this in the essay. My best friend at school was a Muslim guy, and he was, he was born in Britain, but he was Muslim, and he didn't really, he didn't talk about it much, but it was very much him. And I remember going to his house one time, and he's wearing his religious clothes that he's just come down from doing prayer, and I thought it was very weird and intimidating because I had no real connection to real religion, and so this, knowing that my friend was very committed to this thing, it was I didn't understand what Islam was, so it felt very foreign. But there was also part of me that felt probably a bit jealous about it, maybe in the same way that your friend that you were talking about, because I thought, well, here's a man with a living tradition, right? Something's going on here, and I'm not party to it. Yeah, and so I do remember that. So I would make stupid comments to him, and I would make stupid comments to my Christian friends, and probably born out of insecurity. But it's just the kind of thing you do when you're that sort of teenage boy, I think. But at the same time, even though I thought that there was a thing called organized religion that I didn't like, and I bought into the whole story about how oppressive and moronic and irrational it was, I was never somebody who felt that the world was just a mechanical thing. I was never really an atheist in my soul. I've never been like that. I've always felt there was far more to the world than meets the eye. I've always been very suspicious of the kind of mechanistic worldview. So although I was, I had a couple of years of being a smug teenager, I never, even at the time I was reading Tolkien and getting very carried away with the possibility of what the other world was, So I think I've always had strange.
That's how Christianity gets you.
Yeah, no, absolutely. It really does.
You think you're reading about a small hobbit who's carrying a ring, and all the while
Exactly.
it's working its magic on you and converting you, even unbeknownst to you.
I think that's true. And I think that you either have you can have a religious sensibility without having any contact with religion, and then you can spend many, many years, or in my case, decades, wondering what that sensibility is and what you can do with it. And it took me until I was in my late 40s to come to Christianity, which was something I never thought I would ever want to do. But surprisingly, that was the thing that answered the questions I'd had all my life.
I want to also, because there are some elements in your particular worldview that has roots in other ideologies or viewpoints, and you were an environmental activist for a long time, and so also that's also very visible in the Dark Mountain project that we began talking about, that you had that background, and so what made you get into that, and how long was it, and what made you not consider yourself an environmentalist anymore?
Well, I think we could come back to that religious sensibility or spiritual sensibility, if you want to use that dread word. I think when I was young, I was taken on a lot of holidays by my dad, a lot of long camping holidays, walking in the mountains for many weeks on end and camping in quite wild places, as wild as you can find in Britain. And that had a big influence on me. I grew up.
So basically, like me going to the store here in Sweden.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, you see, it wouldn't count as wild. It wouldn't count as wild to a Swede, but to me, it was very wild.
Oh.
So
wild enough.
You're wild enough. Wilder than where I grew up, which was suburban London and suburban southeast of England. So you go up onto a mountain and you camp and you walk for days. And this was the 80s. This was the 80s, right? So you go up onto a mountain. You're really on a mountain. You haven't got your smartphone with you or your GPS device.
No,
you could still get lost up there and not speak to people for days. And that was a big deal for me. But it was very. We did it for over a long period, and I found myself very connected to the natural world. I always have done. I don't know why. And so that was something that was very much part of that sensibility. And so when I became a student, became politicized as students do, became quite sort of radical. And at the time, there was a big environmental movement, big direct action movement in Britain, particularly a lot of people working to stop road building across landscapes that were very old or beautiful. Lots of people digging tunnels and living up trees and setting up camps. It was pretty radical and exciting. So I joined in that, and I found a way of fusing a kind of radical politics with my love of nature. And for me, that was the driver of it. And this was long before the kind of mainstream green movement as it is now, where we're all talking about net zero and solar panels, and it's all become very corporate. This was still, to me as a student, kind of exciting and radical. And it felt like I could do something to protect nature. And it felt, and then you start investigating and you start asking yourself why we live in a culture that destroys so much of the natural world, and you start talking about capitalism and industrialism and profit and growth and progress and all of the other kind of stories you grow up with, and you start to question them all. And that was really how I spent most of my 20s, all of my 20s really, either writing about that, environmentalism, globalization, anti-capitalism, either writing about it or getting involved in activism around it, or both. But it was the politics was always, I was very opinionated and highly political, but the politics was always driven by that same sensibility, that sense that there was something. I would never have used the word sacred, but actually that's what it was. There was something that was more important than. I tell you what it was. It was like growing up in a society with a bunch of values, because although my dad took me walking in the hills, he was also a businessman, and he would teach me. He would just teach me about profit and growth and capitalism and how wonderful the whole system was and how I should get on in it. And I just despised that worldview. And again, that was an intuitive dislike. It wasn't rational. I just hated that worldview that measures and rationalizes everything and destroys beauty because it can't turn a profit. And I still hate that. And so that was really what was driving me all the way through my 20s. My sort of
What happened to the relationship with your dad then? Because it sounds like Darth Vader teaching Luke Skywalker, like, come together, we can rule this galaxy for profit.
Yes, it did.
And you saying no, I will end your profits.
Yeah, it was a bit like that.
But did he like come to? Did he accept your views on these issues?
In the end, I mean, my dad was a complicated man, as all people are. He was from a working class background, and he'd kind of pulled himself up by his bootstraps, and he wanted me to do better than him and go to university and all the stuff he hadn't done, and I did do that. But then when I got there, I started to become an activist and become a sort of anti-capitalist radical, and this was really not what was supposed to happen. So we had a lot of clashes. He didn't really understand what the hell I was doing, and I didn't like his way of seeing, but he'd always known that. He died quite a while ago, but we did, he came to accept it in the end. I think particularly when I started writing books, he saw that I could make a living out of it, and I was doing something that he regarded as respectable. So that was kind of okay. But again, it's sensibilities. My dad, he actually did have a great love of nature. Otherwise, he would never have taken me on those walks. So I think he had similar sensibility to me, but he would not really have talked about it. Men of his generation didn't talk about that sort of thing. So I think it was there. But he'd made a living through, he'd worked very hard in his life, and he'd had to work hard to get where he was, and he wanted to pass that on to me, and he couldn't really understand why I rejected that. He thought I was just throwing it away. But yeah, as I say, it's just, it's that sort of stage in your life when you're pulling away from your dad anyway as a man, and you tend to have these clashes, I think. And ours was pretty fiery for a while, but yeah, it was sort of, I think he came to understand it he came to accept it, even though he never quite understood it, I think.
Did you naturally stop because you got tired of doing activism? It's a problem for all activists, and that they get older and then they might find a partner and have kids and a job even. Or was it more of an ideological process for you? This is not for me anymore.
Yeah, I think it was a bit of both, really. I mean, you do get older. You can't be a 25-year-old activist anymore, and your politics matures, and you see more of the world, and things start to look a lot more grey than black and white. That's just natural. But also, I've written a fair bit about this many years ago now. I came to see that the environmental movement that I'd become part of was changing, and it was changing primarily into a sort of very mainstream, very corporate, very streamlined thing. The kind of thing it's become now, and at the same time being colonized entirely by the kind of the political left. I mean, it had always been a bit of a left-wing movement, and I was a bit of a lefty too back in the days, but it had become very partisan, and it also, at the same time, curiously, as well as being very left-wing, it also became very corporate. It's a strange combination. So it became this sort of thing that it's become now, where it almost feels like the soul of the environmental movement, the people who love nature and wanted to protect it, and also wanted a fairer world for people. That sort of died. I mean, there are still a lot of people doing that, but certainly the mainstream of the thing has just been sucked into an endless discussion about carbon credits and how many wind farms we're going to put up on the mountain. And I felt like it had completely, what had happened was environmentalism, which had originally challenged the whole of the industrial system and said, look, the progress of modernity is the problem here, guys. It's industrial society that's the problem. Had basically been castrated and turned into a movement of people who want to talk about carbon and what kind of radical technologies you can use to make modernity sustainable, basically. And I didn't like that, and I didn't identify with it, and I still don't. But the thing that drove me in the first place is still here. I still have that love of nature. I still want to protect it. I still think a lot of environmentalists do a lot of good work. But I don't think, I'm older, and the movement I was part of is not there anymore. So I moved away from that for a few different reasons, I think.
And you moved into zenBhuddhism and meditation for a while as well on your sort of spiritual journey. And in the essay, you have good things to say about it, as well as other stuff. And I just wanted to hear how it was and why you're not practicing Zen Buddhists anymore.
Yeah, well, I think throughout my 30s, I'd been becoming more and more aware of the fact that I was on this spiritual quest, if you like. And that was kind of what had been going on all along. So I had this religious sensibility, this spiritual sensibility, this belief that the world was not what we were telling ourselves it was. That it was not a material mechanism that we could measure and profit from. That had driven me into politics, and then it drove me out of politics and activism and into culture. And I started asking what's wrong with the culture. And then if you dig down through the culture, you get to the thing that's below the culture, which is always the spiritual foundation of life, actually. And I started to realize that I thought, anyway, that we're in a spiritual crisis, really. We've lost our sense of connection to anything bigger than us. And when I was 40, I decided I was going to go and actually do something about that. I went on a Zen retreat. I don't know why I went to Zen. I'd always been attracted to Buddhism. I'd done a few little bits and pieces of it in my 20s, bit of meditation, bit of training and things like that. I think Buddhism is very attractive to modern Western people who are seeking a spiritual path, but certainly wouldn't dream of becoming Christian. Buddhism is very accessible in the West. It's also very accessible to the modern mind because it's quite self-centered, not in the negative sense, but it's very much about it. If you get it wrong, it can become a self-help path. That's actually not what it is, but you can do it like that. And Buddhism doesn't have any.
You can download one of the apps and do your meditations on the train. And
mindfulness to make you more of an efficient businessman. That's the kind of thing that we do now.
Yeah.
But it's also Buddhism doesn't have the baggage of Christianity. It doesn't have the cultural baggage because we don't know anything about what Buddhism did in the East, or we don't feel that it's, for Western people, we can go into it clean almost. And so I think that's part of the attraction.
No crusades,
no witch trials. It feels kind of exotic. It's also quite welcoming. There's a lot of westernized forms of Buddhism, and it has got a lot of benefits to it. I mean, Zen Buddhism is still an attractive path to me. I did a lot of meditation. I mean, sometimes I still do. I mean, it's possible to sit and just watch your mind and watch it passing and look at the thoughts that come through it and get a better idea of who you are. And it's actually a very useful thing to do for half an hour a day. And there's nothing that contradicts the Christian teaching within it either, because it's as much as anything just paying attention to what is distracting you, which is fits pretty well with the way that the Orthodox Church teaches us about mysticism and the passions as well. But I mean, I practiced Buddhism for quite a long time. I was quite serious about it. I read a lot about it, went on a lot of retreats, tried to practice it every day. And like I say, the meditation is very beneficial. You learn a lot about yourself. It's a very good process of excavating your own, basically the lies you tell yourself about who you are. You can really strip all of those away and see that most of the stories you tell are not really true. But I mean, I did it for a few years, and I mostly had good experiences, some powerful experiences too, but I just came to feel that there was something missing from it, because the worldview of Buddhism, the fundamental theology, not that it is a theology really, is very empty. It's very much about demonstrating that the self does not exist. There is no core to a human being. Mostly, pretty much everything is constructed, which I think is another reason it appeals to Western people, because we like, a bit of social constructionism. And Buddhism is very much showing you that the more you examine yourself, the less you find. And as I say, there's a truth to that, because we create all sorts of layers to ourselves that are not really us. But I thought there was more. I just had a feeling that there was something missing, because in Buddhism, the ultimate aim is to dissolve into nothingness. That's what you do, right? You go through all these cycles of samsara on the wheel of life, the wheel of suffering. Life is suffering, and the aim is to disconnect yourself completely from life so that you never have to suffer, at which point you become enlightened and you just disappear into whatever is out there.
Yeah, and this is also, I mean, many of the Westerners who are interested in Eastern spirituality, and now I'm talking more about Hinduism, then they heard about, so you resurrected and you live again, and then you have past lives, but what many didn't understand was that's the purpose of the tradition is moksha, that you shall cease to be resurrected into this world, but what they took away was the opposites. Many in some New Age spirituality, at least, that the resurrection is something we live on, and so it's more of a bastardized form of Christianity that you could push on to or latch on to the Eastern tradition, but that's not really what it teaches.
No. I mean, it teaches the essence of Buddhism is that life is suffering, which is, I mean, arguably the essence of Christianity too, right? The world is fallen. But as I say, the essence of Buddhism is to dissolve, whereas the essence of Christianity makes a very different claim about the self. Maybe this is what's different about the Western mind, that we do believe in the individual. The individual lives on, the individual soul lives on. And it wasn't that was bothering me. It was a lack of God. It was a lack of God because I was coming increasingly to feel that there was something behind all of this, that maybe this thing that I'd been laughing at in my teenage years might be real. This thing we call God, this really inadequate word that we use. And I didn't really know what to do with that because it wasn't there in Zen. And although the practice of Zen is useful and literally enlightening, I thought that was what was wrong with it. I didn't believe that we dissolved into nothingness in the end. I didn't think that was what was going on. I felt there was this.
You also write that Zen was full of compassion, but it lacked love. And I just felt, because I've tried to meditate, and I'm not as serious as you have, and I just became more self-obsessed and just more. Because I didn't go deep enough, would one of the people who meditate much more has said to me, because you didn't do it enough and you didn't do it properly. But it just felt like I felt cold and lonely and sort of sad. And maybe that's something personal. But I just, when you wrote that it was full of compassion, but it lacked love, it felt like a very concise way to. I haven't phrased like that, but it struck home with me. But could you explain what you meant by that?
Yeah, I mean, I only practiced it for 5 or 6 years, and I wasn't an expert practitioner or anything. So there are probably people who could tell me why that was. And it's also the case that people would say you have to meditate under guidance and you have to be careful because there are definitely places it can take you that drive you a bit bonkers, and you can get it very wrong. It's a bit like prayer in the Christian tradition. You can't just go off and do it on your own. But for me, compassion is the essence of Buddhism, and compassion is a good thing. But it felt a bit, because Buddhism is very much about detachment. The aim of the Buddhist is to be entirely detached from this world. Now, again, to some degree, that's also the aim of the Christian monk, actually. So in that sense, there's commonality there. But there was just something there. And since I've become a Christian, I can see what it was. That the essence of, again, the Christian claim is that there is a creator that loves each one of us, and who we can love in return. And that love is transformative. It's a very personal claim. It's a very personal claim, and it's an outrageous claim as well. But it's the claim of Christianity. And the other outrageous claim, of course, is that creator took human form and came to the earth and did something which changed the course of history, and also taught us how to live in that kind of loving space. So there's a love at the essence of Christianity. Not that it's always practiced by us Christians, but that's the essence of the thing. We're told that there is a loving creator. But you're not told that in Buddhism. You're told that you must be compassionate to all living beings, and that's fine. That's a good thing. But as I say, compassion is chillier than love somehow. There's obviously a lack of passion in Buddhism. That's the point. And I think that for a while I thought that was a good thing, and then after a while I thought, no, the lack of passion is a problem. There's something that's missing here. There's a lack of love, a love of God, a love of life. And it wasn't that I turned against it or anything, but I just thought this isn't enough. There's something missing, and I don't quite know what it was. And I certainly wasn't thinking, I'll become a Christian then. But I knew there was something that I needed that I wasn't getting.
And then it sounds now when we're talking, and I know it's not meant like that. It sounds like you went from Zen Buddhism to where you are now, but you took a detour from Zen Buddhism into Wicca. And as someone on the outside, and you say as much in your essay that it is a constructed religion from parts of the pre-Christian traditions, and it just and for the layman, you become a witch when you enter a covenant, so to speak. And but you have quite. It's not. You're not ridiculing it in your essay. It's one of the things that stands out in this essay is that you are mocking yourself quite a bit, but you're not mocking the traditions you enter. But could you describe then what is the attraction of Wicca and what did it entail?
Well, I think that for me, I was on this spiritual search. I'd gone through Zen. I thought I was looking for God. I wanted to worship. That's what it was. And I was very uncomfortable about that because I was still a Western individualist, and we're not supposed to worship. We don't do that. We're free thinkers and brave rebels and the rest of it. But I got the sense that I really needed to sort of bow before God. That's what I thought. And I thought, I really don't know how to do that. So I wanted something that had more of a sense of deity. There was something to work with, to look towards, to pay obeisance to. It wasn't just this sort of quite empty world that Buddhism seemed to present to me. And because also I had this love of nature, which was still there, I thought, well, maybe I could find a nature religion. Maybe I can worship God through nature. And so I sort of wandered around in the undergrowth of neo-paganism for a bit. Did a few, did a couple of retreats, sitting on the hills for a few days, not eating any food, and learning about mythology and looking into druids and all the rest of it. And basically, it's interesting. This, I don't mock Wicca, although I would strongly recommend that everybody stays away from it now, certainly as a Christian, because I think the forces that people are playing with in Wicca, usually unintentionally, are not good forces. And I didn't realize that at the time. I mean, it's not as if people going into this are devil worshippers, but I think they end up opening up spaces that they don't realize they're opening up. So I would stay away from it very much. But at the same time, the people who go into all of these New Age things, they are people on the same spiritual quest that I was on. They're lost Western people like we all are, and they think I need God because I believe we can't live without God fundamentally. We can't live without the divine, but we don't know where to find it. The Christian church isn't really helping us in the West. So where do we go? Maybe we become Muslims, or maybe we go to Vedanta, or we go to Zen, or maybe we become Buddhists or Druids or Wiccans, whatever, depending on what we like. It's the same quest. It's people who are quite lost because we have abandoned our historical faith and we haven't found another one to replace it. I don't think we're going to. So Wicca is, and a lot of the neo-pagan faiths, they are all a bit silly. You're right. I was aware even at the time the Wicca is a bit silly. And it's very clearly constructed. Yeah. And Wiccans are quite open about this as well, by the way. There's still a few Wiccans who like to pretend that their religion is the remnant of an ancient pre-Christian witch cult, but it isn't. And most of them know that. It was invented in the 1950s by Gerald Gardner, a very eccentric Englishman. And he mashed together Masonic rituals and some of the work that he'd been doing with Aleister Crowley, the magician, and a very fashionable book at the time written by Margaret Mead, The Witch Cult in Western Europe, which was making this claim that there was an ancient witch religion that had survived Christian persecution, and all that was sort of mashed up by Gardner. And he pretended he'd discovered this witch cult, this witch-coven in England that had been there forever, but he hadn't really. And then the 60s came along and everybody thought this was brilliant. And then they combined it with kind of, sex magic, because there's a lot of taking your clothes off in Wicca as well, which a lot of 60s types like. So you get to basically construct your own slightly New Age, slightly 1968-ish nature religion. You choose your own god. You open magical circles. You do all sorts of things like that. And it's a mashup of lots of different things. So some of it's interesting and useful. Some of it's nonsense. And some of it, like I say, I think is dangerous, because what you end up doing is going into a magic circle and opening up things and calling entities in, and you're sort of playing around with this. Or maybe not playing around. I don't think most people really understand what's going on. And so that was what I was doing for a while. I enjoyed it. It was interesting. And then suddenly it wasn't anymore. Suddenly it was feeling a bit sinister for me. And that was when I started becoming a Christian by accident. I felt like I was rescued from that. It was a very strange experience.
You write in your essay that you're basically preparing to go into one of your rites with your Wiccan circle, and then you just feel like almost a physical obstacle to doing that. You just felt sick and you had to lie down or sit down, and just like physically impossible for you to do that. And from there, like how. So this is like, did you become a Christian basically right then and there, or did you realize over time that was a turning point? Or
no, it was definitely a realization.
How was
yeah, I mean, it was a very strange experience. I did feel like I was physically being prevented from doing this anymore. I felt like someone was intervening. I felt like, I'm trying to remember exactly the sort of course of events, because it's, you can simplify these stories, but basically over quite a while, I felt myself weirdly both being very alienated by what I was doing and starting to. I had a dream with Jesus in it. That was the first thing I remember. And I had this dream, and I saw that this was the direction I was supposed to be going in. And I woke up and I thought, that's very weird. And I actually wrote down exactly what I dreamt, and I drew a picture of what I'd seen, because I saw Christ in this dream, and I was very disturbed by it. because I really didn't want to be a Christian. I had no intention of, it didn't cross my mind. It wasn't a rational choice I made. I wasn't sort of rationally moving from one religion to another. It was something that started coming at me. So I had this dream, and then this thing happened in my coven. I couldn't go in there anymore. And I thought I think these are connected. Someone is stopping me from doing this anymore. And so I took a break and I said, I can't come anymore to my coven mates, and I just have to have a break. And more dreams, more things were happening, strange things. And suddenly I just, maybe this was just a coincidence, but I felt like I was meeting Christians all over the place. Friends of mine who I hadn't known were Christian suddenly told me they were. And I was running a writing mentoring course at the time, and I had a lot of writers coming to me who were vicars or priests who suddenly wanted help with books they were doing. And I thought, something's going on. There's something Christian going on here. I don't really want it to go on, but I'm going to have to start looking into it. So I started talking to friends who were Christian and asking advice and reading books. And I thought I'd better actually read the Bible, which I'd never done properly before. I had read it, but not as someone who took it seriously. So I started reading the Gospels, and more things were happening. And I just felt very, very, very strongly inside me that I was being drawn towards this thing. And I felt...
Det är festivalsäsong och det betyder massor av lera. Så Alex surfade in på Amazon för att hitta ett tält som rymmer upp till 5 torra vänner, en mysig campingsäng, skön, och leopardmönstrade gummistövlar. Miau! Nu får Alex hantera precis lagom mycket lera för att vara Alex, vilket är betydligt mindre lera än för den där leriga dansande mannen där borta. Men vänta, har han bara lera på sig? Japp, bara lera. Håll dig torr, får det att hända. Hitta det på amazon.se.
Upptäck Ford e-Custom, elversionen av Europas mest sålda transportbil. Den har upp till 370 kilometers räckvidd, snabbladdning och finns nu med 4-hjulsdrift. Just nu till Ford Pro Edition-pris från 479 000 ex-moms. Läs mer på Ford.se eller besök din Ford återförsäljare. Ready, set, Ford.
Tänk om din plånbok kunde prata. Vad skulle den då säga om din relation till ekonomi?
Alla relationer har ju sina ups and downs. Men att han har lån lite här och där, det tror jag skulle vara en ick för rätt många plånböcker och inte bara för mig.
Ett första steg mot en bättre relation till sin plånbok kan vara att samla sina lån.
Samla dina lån till ett på lendo.se.
Like C.S. Lewis describes this in his book, The Surprise by Joy, when he I can't remember exactly the phrase he uses. I use it in the essay, but he said I was basically being inexorably drawn towards an encounter with him who I radically desired not to meet. Right, so I felt like, and this is one of the reasons I think Christianity is true, because I didn't want it to be. Right, the other things I'd done, whether it was Wicca or Zen or anything else, I'd gone into them because I thought this looks like it could give me what I think I need. It looks interesting. I'll go and do it. Christianity, I felt like I was dragged into, almost not against my will, because you always have free will, but certainly to start with, I was resisting it, but it was happening. There's no doubt it was happening. And then the more I looked into the Christian story and the more I read the Gospels, the more I started talking to people, I thought, this is not really the thing I thought it was at school when I was graffitiing books in the church. This actually has a much deeper story to tell us about human nature. And I didn't know it.
It's a great revenge on you.
It is, exactly. God has a sense of humor.
From the things you wrote. Yeah.
I hope. I hope.
Yeah.
I'm still going to apologize. I hope so. But yes, it is revenge. God also moves at his own speed. So he got me in the end.
One of the things that's I think this is part of Protestantism or thinkers I've read or academics I've read, authors have said as much, that we sort of reduced God over time, at least in Protestant countries, to, if one expresses love, for example, in earlier times, you would say that's might be God working through you, because love is godly or a virtue, and you can also you would experience things in yourself and in relation to others, and you would feel the presence of God in a way that we now would say, but that's just your psychological framework, or that's just your substances in the brain that's shooting in the wrong way, or you have very material explanations now for these things, and then you sort of reduce God over time to being what Kierkegaard calls a leap of faith, that it cannot be rational, it cannot be an intellectual thing, and something you think your way into, but you have to basically experience it and have the ability to talk in tongues, and that's where you get the evangelical or the charismatic traditions as well, that they do a lot of that, and it's a logical way to view God. But when I read your journey, it's not an easy journey. Sorry, I'm laughing. I'm not laughing in an evil way. It's just you had to go through many steps, and you had to think a lot, and you had to read a lot, and to end up where you were. And how do you think about that? Like, have we reduced God to a very tiny space where you can say, like, if you're a Dawkins-esque atheist teenager, you can say, like, oh, do you believe in the flying spaghetti monster as well? Because it's basically the space left in how we talk about God.
Yeah, no, I think that's exactly what it is. There's Richard Dawkins had a conversation once with Rowan Williams, who was the Archbishop of Canterbury in Britain, and he was explaining to Rowan Williams why he didn't believe in God, and Williams said, "Well, I don't believe in the God that you don't believe in either." And it was a good good response to the more simplistic kind of flying spaghetti monster sort of critique. But I think that, I've ended up in the Eastern Orthodox Church, which is another thing I would never have expected. And I felt like I was taken there, not just, through prayer and that element of things, but also through reading and thinking and experiencing. And there's I didn't know anything when I was younger about the split between Eastern and Western Christianity. And I don't think most Western people know what the Orthodox Church is. It's just, people with big hats and big beards. That's what they do in Greece and Russia. And it looks a bit foreign and strange. But the Orthodox Church, which is really the original Christian church, the Roman Church broke away from it, and then the Protestants broke away from Rome, and now we've got about, I think, 2,500 Christian churches, or something ridiculous like that. And that doesn't count all the tiny ones in America that you can start with just 2 people in a barn. But the Orthodox Church has maintained a teaching right from the beginning, and it's maintained a liturgy that's over 1,000 years old, and it's maintained the mystical prayer tradition of the Desert Fathers, the hesychastic tradition. It's got everything, funnily enough, it's got everything that Western people are looking for when they go to Zen or Vedanta or any of the Eastern traditions, because what people go to the East for, I think, is they're looking for mystical connection with God or connection with the divine, because you're not going to get that in the Church of England. You're not going to get that in any Protestant church. You're not going to get it in the Catholic Church anymore either. Those churches have all become extremely worldly. And I think over a long period, it started before the Reformation. The Western Church, the Catholic Church itself, and then certainly the Protestant churches, reduced God almost to a logical proposition, and also reduced God to something that is purely transcendent and not immanent, something that is out there. And it's easy enough to move from that God to the sort of deist God of the Enlightenment, where God is just a clockmaker who set the world in motion, and then you can't access him. And then it's easy enough to move from that to saying, well, maybe there isn't a clockmaker. Maybe the world is just a clock that evolved by itself. And that's where we are now. So the whole process, you could start with sort of William of Ockham, and you could go all the way through probably 800 years of Western history. Ends up with the whole process is removing our mystical relationship with God and turning it into almost an intellectual proposition. And that was the Christianity I grew up with, I think, that God is a sort of thing out there somewhere. And you can't really connect with that thing, whatever it is. Doesn't intervene in the world, doesn't get involved in the world. His son did come down 2,000 years ago, and he'll come back at some point, and here's what he told us to do. So we just read that book every Sunday. But it didn't feel like a lived experience at all. And when it did feel like a lived experience, it was just as a set of kind of moral teachings. Here's how to be good. Here's what you mustn't do. Don't do these things, you'll go to hell. Do all these things, and you're a good Christian. And that's fine. They're just moral teachings, but it's unclear why you need Jesus to give you those moral teachings, if that's all he's doing. And so you end up with this very deracinated version of Christianity. And so when I found Orthodoxy, I discovered that the essence of Orthodoxy is connecting the heart to God. It's a very mystical faith. It's very much about what's called theosis, union with God. The notion that you can connect yourself to God's energies in this world and transform yourself, and be transformed rather, not transform yourself, through the prayer and through the liturgy. And it's very lived, and it's very unashamedly unapologetic in talking about miracles and living saints and the presence of the devil and all of the things that Western Christianity is very embarrassed to talk about. Pretty much all of the things that the Reformation removed in the West are still there in the East, only without the centralization of the Roman Church. So, the Orthodox Church has got plenty of its own problems. It's not to be idealized, but there's something in it that, to my mind, is our Christian inheritance in the West that we've lost progressively over years. Because for the first 1,000 years of Christianity, the first 1,000 years of Christianity, there was no Orthodox Church or Catholic Church or anything else. It was just the Church. So I do feel that kind of heritage is our heritage too, and I find that really exciting.
A few sentences in the essay that I identify as pretty orthodox, and it's you write, the cross holds the key to everything. The sacrifice is all the teaching. I am a new and green pupil. I can talk for hours, but ideas will become idols in the blink of an eye. I have to pick up my cross and start walking. And those two last sentences is ideas will become idols in the blink of an eye. Could you explain what that means, and maybe after what it means to pick up the cross and start walking?
Yeah, well, it's a version of a quote from St. Gregory of Nyssa, one of the early fathers of the church, and before the split. So the fathers of one of the early saints of all Christians, and he said, "Ideas create idols. Only wonder leads to knowing." And I thought that was really lovely. It's really stuck with me since I first heard it. And it's almost the essence of orthodoxy. But as I say, this was before there was a split between East and West. So this is the inheritance of a very particular strand of mystical Christianity, which you can certainly find in the West as well. Ideas create idols. And I think I liked it because it told me about a lot of what I've been doing wrong in my life. It's very easy, especially if you're an intellectual sort of a person, or a person who likes thinking and reading, like me, and probably like you as well, to be very connected to ideas, to be excited by ideas, be excited by philosophy, to look for answers. That's what the curious mind does. But you can turn it into an idol. You can turn your philosophical idea into an idol. I mean, Marxism seems to me to be a great example of an idea that turns into an idol, and then people can't walk away from. But you can find it all across politics, and you can find it in religion as well. And St. Gregory is saying, look, it's wonder that leads to knowing. It's not ideas. It's not trying to work out the perfect philosophy. It's not even theology. It's experience. It's the wonder of God in creation, the wonder of God himself, the wonder that you might experience through prayer. And so it's very experiential. And this is the essence of mystical Christianity. The theology is important. The church is important. The structure is necessary. But ultimately, it's about experience. That's what you're looking for. You're looking for that union with God. That's what you're trying to walk towards, and that's what Christ is teaching you to do. So when we say picking up the cross, obviously this is the work of all Christians. We're supposed to carry a cross. That's what Christ tells us to do. And what that means is that you have to suffer on the journey. Whatever your particular cross is, everyone has a different one. It's not an easy life being a Christian. It's not supposed to be comfortable. And I think maybe that was something else I reacted against in my childhood as well, that Christianity was certainly in Britain, it was the establishment faith. So it was a very comfortable middle-class faith, and you could easily combine it with your nice career and your big house and your establishment job. And that's really not what it's supposed to be. It's supposed to be a struggle. You're not supposed to. St. Paul says, do not be conformed to this world. That's the work of a Christian, not for the sake of rebellion, but simply because the values of somebody who's trying to carry a cross and serve the world, which is what we're supposed to do, are very different from the world. So that's what we're supposed to do. I'm not claiming I'm very good at it at all, but it's Christian. A Christian life is supposed to be a life of service, and you're supposed to suffer for others. And the deeper I go into Christianity, and I've really only been in it a few years, the clearer it becomes to me how utterly I have not done that in my life. How utterly sort of selfish and self-centered and all the rest of it I've been. And so then you have to do something about that. You have to do it. You have to change your life. And it is the strange thing about Christianity is it's when you ask Christ into your life, he starts changing you. And it sounds very strange, but it happens. There's a wonderful English painting called The Light of the World, and it's by a pre-Raphaelite painter called Holman Hunt. And it's a picture of Jesus, and he's just standing outside the door of this cottage, this old English cottage. And the door's all overgrown with ivy, and he's got a lamp in his hand, and he's knocking on the door gently. And if you look at the painting closely, you see that the door has no handle on the outside. So he can't get in unless you open the door. And that's really what the Christian story is. It's like he's always there knocking at your door. And you can not open it for your whole life if you want. He's not going to break it down. But then if you do invite him in, he's going to get to work. And you'll find yourself being altered at the cellular level. It really happens. And so I'm not the same person I was even a few years ago. And I don't know what I'm.
When did it happen? Because it's when one talks about this, it's often people who are comfortable talking about their faith in public. Usually, either they grew up with it and they have studied it. They're theologians, but you're not like a classically trained theologian at university.
Definitely not.
So how long ago was this when you could say, I know now that I'm a Christian?
Well, I would say it was 3 or 4 years ago. Something else I wrote about in my essay, I had a very powerful experience at a music concert. Funnily enough, I was just sitting in the audience of a music concert. This was after all the other things that happened that I told you about. So I was already moving in this kind of direction. I was exploring Christianity, but still not sure what to do about it. And I had this enormously powerful experience where I just felt overwhelmed by this huge love for everybody, which is not normal for me. And I just felt this, and it wasn't just it wasn't like I've had a tab of E and I love everybody. It was a sense of interconnection with everything and a great powerful love that came from somewhere else. And it was so overwhelming. I had to go and sit down, and I wanted it to not stop, but also to stop. And that was it. I thought, okay, I've been asking for this, and here it is. And that was just the culmination of something. And I thought, right, okay, I can't keep putting it off. It looks like I'm a Christian. So then I had to work out what that meant. Which church do I join? What does it mean? Can I do it on my own without telling anyone? Because I don't know how to talk about it. I hoped I could be a Christian on my own in my bedroom and never have to tell the world, but it doesn't seem to work like that. So that was that, and I would say that was.
Because if you're a Buddhist, I would say that actually can increase your status. So if you say I've been to silent retreats and I practice meditation, and somebody asks you, you could tell that in a secular setting, like at work, and people say, oh, yeah, maybe I should do that as well. Did you like it? Yeah, I feel more enlightened now, and I learned so much, and I really recommend it. And then people actually will regard you with sort of not awe or anything like that, but you get respect for it. You can get points, so to speak, in the social hierarchy for being a practicing Buddhist. But if you're a Christian, at least in a Swedish setting, it sort of can lower your status.
No, definitely, yeah.
I've talked to Christians from the Middle East, Assyrians and Syrians and Copts, and they have no experience of that. I would say, that it would be something you're almost ashamed of. They're like, oh, this must be sort of a Protestant, Lutheran, Swedish thing to be ashamed or feel like it's sort of corny or geeky almost to be Christian. But did you feel that when you realized?
Definitely, yeah. No, I mean, I think it's probably the most socially unacceptable thing to do where I come from, to be a Christian. I mean, not quite so much. I mean, I'm English. I live in rural Ireland now, so it's not quite so socially unacceptable out here. Certainly, there's a lot of older Catholics, but certainly in the cities in Ireland, it's very unacceptable now. It's just an embarrassment. You're not supposed to do it. People will regard you either with bemusement or hostility. It's very interesting. I mean, I have friends who, as you say, talk about Buddhism. They're absolutely fine with it. Tell them I'm a Wiccan. They might think that's a bit weird, but they're still interested. Tell them you're a Christian. They sort of look at you like you've lost your mind. Why would you do that? I had friends who don't really talk to me anymore. I have readers who wrote to me to say, I can't believe this has happened to you. I used to love your writing. I'm never reading you again. This is terrible. Yeah, I mean, I've gained a lot of other readers who are interested in my writing since, but they're definitely, you get a definite push away. I mean, I don't want to pretend I've been a martyr or anything, but it's regarded now as a weird and unacceptable thing to do. And I think if you go back to this idea that we are in rebellion against our own culture, we're in rebellion against our own religion, then Christianity in the modern mind in the West is supposed to be something we left behind. And we tell ourselves this story that it was a purely oppressive force that abused women and burned witches and launched crusades and never did anything good. And aren't we?
And believed the world was flat.
Yeah, believed the world was flat, and nobody was a scientist, and nobody was rational. Everybody was crazy. And aren't we so lucky to have freed ourselves from this yoke? And that's the story. That's the Enlightenment propaganda that's still extremely strong in our culture. And so people just think you're bonkers because they've been brought up to believe that Christianity is a dangerous, oppressive, irrational thing. But somehow that doesn't apply to any other religion, as you say. And that's because it's our heritage. If you grew up in Southeast Asia, you might find Buddhism very oppressive. It's, that the history of Buddhism has been quite brutal in some ways in just as Christianity has, but because it's not our culture, it doesn't seem that way. So it's exactly that. It's a very socially unacceptable thing to do now. You don't get status points. You would have done 100 years ago, but you don't now.
There is something that I'm not the first to comment on this, but I've come across many contemporary thinkers who recognize the void left behind by Christianity's withdrawal, as you're talking about, like our rebellion against our own heritage, and they are not the triumphant atheists like Dawkins, Hitchens, or Daniel Dennett, but they are more mournful about it. And one example is Douglas Murray, who bemoans that he says he can't believe, but he wished he could. And I'm interviewing him later this week, so I'll put the question to him then. And I also interviewed Tom Holland recently. And when you read Dominion, his book on Dominion of Christianity's influence over the Western world, especially, he's not at all. He thinks that it's a shame, basically, that Christianity has disappeared to the degree that it has. But so they seem to believe in Christianity, but they can't seem to make themselves believe in Christ, is basically what I would say. So I was wondering what you think of this, if you share the observation, and what do you think of their conclusion and what they're saying?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of it around. It's very interesting. I mean, I talked to Tom Holland myself recently, a week or two ago, for another podcast that hasn't come out yet, and we talked about this a lot. It was a very interesting conversation, and he said I regard myself as a Christian, but at the same time he couldn't quite make that leap to believing in the truth of the heart of it. And I think it's because he's a historian, he's a trained historian, he's a very left brain academic man, like we all are. I'm a trained historian as well. And so if you spend a long time, say, analyzing biblical texts or looking at the history of things, it's very difficult to get that way of thinking out of your head, the modern way of thinking in which you just pick things apart and analyze them. It seems like a mad and irrational thing to do, to take a leap into saying, well, what if this is actually true, right? I mean, it doesn't seem like it ought to be true, but what if it is? What if it is? That would change everything. And I think you're right. Douglas Murray is another example of that. I would say Jordan Peterson is another example of that, a very good one, actually. He spends all his time talking about Christianity. He can't stop talking about Christianity. He's endlessly telling people what Christianity means and what they should think about it, the rest of it. But he won't go to church, and he won't make that jump. It's like he's fighting something. I think there's a very common thing now, because what we can see in the West is that we're in this period of cultural collapse. And all of the values we had and the culture we had is falling apart very fast. We've moved very fast into this post-Christian era, I think maybe just in the past 5 or 10 years, with a new generation. I mean, I'm very struck by the fact that there's young people growing up now, the internet generation, they really haven't got the first clue about what the Christian story even is. It's very striking to me. I'm 50 years old. I went to school at a time when, as I say, most people weren't really Christian, but still I learned the Lord's Prayer. I had to sit and listen to parables. I knew the basic outline of the story. I know what the loaves and fishes are. I know the famous stories that Jesus tells and why he tells them, even though I didn't believe it. So I've got that cultural background, but the kids today growing up in Britain, they don't have it really. So they don't even know what this is. And so the whole culture is shifting very rapidly into something else. And a lot of people, especially more conservative people, can see that the essence of the culture that they value is Christianity. But as you say, often they can't actually commit to it. So you get this sort of strange thing called cultural Christianity, where they want the outgrowth of Christianity, but they don't want the thing at the heart of it. But you can't have that. You can't
why?
do it.
Why don't you think you get me? Because I'm one of those. I would describe myself at least for the longest period of time, like a cultural Christian, calling myself that, and maybe calling myself agnostic. For a while I didn't, because I felt that it was more honest to say atheist, but then I started calling myself agnostic again. And also I'm certainly labeled as a conservative, even though there is what I find in conservatism is sometimes performativity, so to speak, that you almost like a cargo cult, that you the planes that came to the Pacific Ocean during the Second World War, and then they came with what was called cargo by the locals, the natives. And but then when the war stopped, the planes stopped coming. So they built like landing lanes and like so that the planes would come back with cargo. But they didn't understand the mechanics of why the plane came, and it's sort of condescending perhaps to these natives. But I mean, it's very hard to understand the causal mechanism of stuff, and I feel like sometimes the conservatism that I've been a part of, and I'm surely a part of now, it's sometimes sort of a cargo cult of a Christianity, the way it was before. So you want all the things, the good traditions, but you won't go to church, and you won't. But you can do like a thumbs up to people who do go to church. Like very good, very good. That's very good for the traditions I like.
Yeah, you see, the problem with that is that the attachment there is to the tradition and not to the thing that built the tradition. And the purpose of Christianity is not to build a tradition or to create a culture that you might like, or to create a beautiful church building or lovely hymns. I mean, I love all those things as well. I love particularly the culture of English Christianity and English parish churches and evensong and these things. Even though I'm not Church of England, that's meaningful to me culturally. But the purpose of Christianity is to transform you and fill you with grace and bring you closer to God and make you Christ-like. That's what you're trying to do. You don't follow a religious path because you want to create a culture. The culture is incidental. English Christianity, British Christianity, Western Christianity, they happened as a result of any number of historical circumstances, some of them good and some of them bad. But they happened because huge numbers of people were passionate Christians. I mean, if I look at the history of Ireland, where I live, in the early centuries of Christianity here, there were 400 monasteries in this island. It was called the Island of Saints. There were far more monasteries than there were towns or villages. That almost every 100 yards you would find a saint living in a cave, or a bunch of monks on an island, or a new monastery. And these people were passionate about this faith and prepared to die for it. And that created a Christian country over time. But they didn't come here saying, right, we need a Christian culture, let's do that. They don't start from worldly things. I think it was Chesterton who said something like, I'm going to get this wrong, he said something like, if you aim for the world, no, it's C.S. Lewis, wasn't it? He said, if you aim to work in the world and hope to get heaven thrown in, you're not going to get either of those things. But if you aim for heaven, you'll create something special in the world as well. And that's what the Christians did. So you can't have anything called cultural Christianity without Christ, any more than you could have, say, cultural Islam without wanting to genuinely believe in Muhammad and the revelation to Muhammad. You can't do that because you're sort of LARPing, really. Like you say, it's cargo cults.
Yeah.
A cult, I think that the conclusion I think I've come to here, with all the writing I've been doing over the last couple of years, is that every culture on earth has always had a spiritual core, and it's the spiritual core that creates the culture. Whether it's the smallest tribe or the biggest empire, there is a connection to the divine at the heart of it. So you can't go out there saying, "Oh, I'd like to have a Christian culture, please, because I don't like the new culture." You can just be a Christian or not. It's up to you, but you certainly don't get to have a Christian culture without Christians. That's not going to happen.
Yeah. I just recently read Cormac McCarthy's book, The Road, and it was awfully depressing in a lot of ways, of course. It's about a father and a son traveling through the wasteland, and after a post-apocalyptic wasteland. So nothing grows, nothing lives. It's human-made catastrophe. And there are cannibals who eat other people, and they don't, because they are carrying the fire, and that's the phrase. And they are good people. We are the good guys, and they affirm that to each other. And I think Cormac McCarthy, what he did is it's sort of, I might stretch this, but it's sort of a representation of the world you live in without faith and without a spiritual core. And so basically, it's the literal father and the literal son, and what that means to live in that relation. And they are literally carrying the fire, the spark. And so it's like a literal version of the Christian gospel. But it's a very depressing. If a gospel is good news, this is not good news. This is very bad news.
Are not usually good news, are they?
No. This is one of the most depressing books. I actually fell ill while reading it, so I was having fever dreams. They were coming during the night, and I woke up and I was sure that my kids were being eaten all the time. And I realized I'm dreaming, but I could not dispel the dreams. They were just coming back. So I had to take a break while I was having the fever. I can't read Cormac McCarthy while having a fever. I'm too weak. It's too much cannibalism.
That's fair enough. That's fair enough.
I've kept you for a long time. I just wanted to. There's a machine in your title, and we haven't gotten to that. But of course, the machine is in the background of a lot of what we're talking about now. What is this machine? And you write that we're building this machine to replace God, and so you get curious as to what this machine is.
Yeah, well, the machine is really a word for it's a shorthand for the technological structures of modernity. It's a shorthand that a lot of greater writers have used. I borrowed it from D.H. Lawrence and R.S. Thomas and George Orwell and others, certainly in the early 20th century, who could see this rising technological society, interconnected technology, hugely industrialized, very centralized, very rationalistic. It's the manifestation of the modern project. And I think in the age of the internet, in the 21st century, we can see it everywhere. We're all completely controlled by machinery. We can't take our eyes off screens. It's very difficult even to function in society without access to the internet. And we're starting to think like.
I mean, when we started the podcasts, we had problems with the audio and the video. Mm-hmm. So it was just proving that the machine really knows more about us than we want to, and just trying to physically hinder us to have this conversation.
I wouldn't be surprised if that were happening. Yeah, I mean, look, you can see what's happening with, say, the creation of AIs now. Just in the last few weeks, you've had these chatbots popping up that have. You've probably seen some of the disturbing transcripts that these things are doing. Whatever they exactly are, we're moving into a time where we are living in a deeply monitored and controlled environment almost everywhere. We saw that particularly with COVID. COVID was a real eye-opener for me, the way that we could be digitally monitored and controlled and vaccinated and propagandized, over in an incredibly intense way over a very short period of time with no consent or discussion at all. It was very literally apocalyptic. That it was very revealing, and we can expect a lot more of that kind of thing. So this is the machine, and I think that the machine, as I say, it is what we build when we're trying to create a world by ourselves. I mean, the Christian story is that we can't do anything without God. We can have our free will, and God has created us with free will, and so we can do what we like, but we can't live a full life without God because he has to be at the center of everything. So if we go off on our own and we do what the serpent told us to do in the Garden of Eden, which is eat the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil so that we can become as gods, in other words, we start to build our own world, then we end up here, in this very technological Tower of Babel. And what's so fascinating about the Christian Bible is you can go back to the book of Genesis, which of course is much older than Christianity and older than Judaism as well. And you can see pretty much the whole human story laid out there. You can see a rebellion against God, the creation of technological society, the collapse of the tower, the first murder. What happens when you break communion with God and creation? You end up, in this fallen, broken world, and you keep trying to make a covenant with God and then breaking it again and going off and worshipping idols and, all the rest of it. And it's pretty much the story of the whole of human history, as far as I can see, in a book that's about 2,500 years old. And it tells you what we are. So we can either walk towards God, which is the cross, or we can be absorbed into the machine. But the purpose of this machine at this point is to create new technological life, to transhumanize us, to create artificial intelligences, to build new versions of creation. We're making our own world like gods, and it's going to go in some very dark directions. So it's very disturbing.
I just feel like it's sort of course, the themes are there in the Old Testament and humanity's rebellion against God, but it's also that some of the technological development has increased in pace to such a degree that in your hand, if you have an iPhone, you have basically access to all Christian sins from just so that you can just. Pornography, you can surf in and watch pornography, or you can buy stuff. You can just indulge yourself in whatever, and you could also take away focus from people you are there to take care of, like your kids. You can put them in front of screens. You can alienate yourself from. So you have the temptation, if a temptation was present for somebody living 2,000 or 3,000 years ago, and of course they were, because they were also human. Now you're in a world where we've built, because of our how rich we are, we have built in so much temptation into the world that you're surrounded basically at all times by things that want to seduce you into behaviors. So I'm more and more leaning to like when I saw that ChatGPT AI, because I'm a journalist. I just I wanted to take up my wooden shoe and just smash my computer, because I'm a stupid ape. So, it just feels like the machine is accelerating also in this. And but one thing this is something that I wanted to ask you. Like when you wrote about the manifesto for Dark Mountain Project, it was in 2009, I think. You talk about the myth of progress. And we don't need anything else than our reason and our rationality, and then we will progress. So every generation have it better than the next, and then we're just on the way up, and we're getting better. And so that's why the origin story of Christianity, or the origin story of how humanity came to be, is wrong, because we are getting better. We are the gods, and we are God. Why does that lead us astray, do you think?
Well, it leads us astray because it isn't true. We're not gods. We're not capable of being gods. And the myth, the progress story you have to leave a lot out to look at that, to look at human society as a constant progress towards a better world. I mean, certainly, obviously, things have improved in many ways. Many other things have got worse. The climate is changing. We've destroyed half of the forests. We've lost many of our old cultures. We've lost our spiritual roots. And I think that matters more than we think it is going to matter. But I also think that the momentum of technological society, of the machine, if you like, is towards this creation of new intelligences. This is what we're doing. We're trying to create... It's very interesting to me what the momentum behind this is if you look at it spiritually. What exactly do we think we're trying to do when we build AIs? Why are we even trying to do this? Do we know? Has anybody, when I've asked people why they're doing it, and I've asked some transhumanists this question, and they all come up with sort of generic answers. Oh, we want a fairer world and more social justice and more progress and the rest of it. But it doesn't really answer the question of why they've chosen to do it like this. There's some drive within us, or within some people anyway, to create artificial life. It's the same drive that gets people to invent armed robot dogs, which are now, which now exist. What kind of a mind do you have to create an armed robot dog and to imagine that that's not going to go wrong? But it's the same attitude that leads people to attempt to live forever, to upload their minds to the cloud, to all the rest of the stuff that's going on in Silicon Valley. And if you look at the agenda of these people, the same guys who are running Google and Twitter and the rest of them, these are idealists who want to build an entirely new world. They want to replace God. They want to be God, and they want to create new life. They're trying to live like God himself because that's what they think you do. That's the logic, I think, of a humanistic technological culture. That's the direction we're running in. I think you have to be pretty naive about humanity to imagine that that's going to work out well. But I also think it's the manifestation of the original rebellion. We can either live as God intended us to do in some form of harmony with each other and nature, or we can either live to serve or we can live to control. That's the cross on the machine. So that's how it seems to me. And that was why it was shocking to me to discover that Christianity had a story to tell me that made a lot of sense in terms of where we were going now. It has an alternative future for us. And that's been quite an exciting discovery.
So what is to be done then for us? I mean, you linked to a text from another, you also have Substack, and I will link to it. And you link to another Substack, and now I forget the name, but where he wrote about how many of us will still have to live within the machine, so to speak. So we are using internet now, and I mean, and you will work for big corporations because you have to get money to feed your kids and everything. But how can you live in a way to not be so much a part of it, or preserve something that's, as you say, more in line with how we should live?
Yeah, well, it's the big question, isn't it? And everybody's circumstances are different. I mean, I don't have a smartphone, for example. I'm never going to have one. So that's one of my answers. I don't have any social media, but I'm still here on the internet. So It's a question of how you can maintain your sanity and how you can maintain control, I think, of yourself. If you find you sort of know when the machine is controlling you, like you were saying before. You know when you're addicted to your phone. You know when you're scrolling through stuff you shouldn't be. You know when you've got a life where your children spend more time on the screen than talking to you. And it's it's very difficult because the entirety of society is designed to make us do this. If you think about it this way, the 7 deadly sins in the Western Christian tradition are now all profitable and extremely encouraged, every single one of them. Right? There's money to be made in every single one of those. They've all been monetized. And we're surrounded by screens and temptations and these kind of pushes and pulls every day. And it is very difficult. Not many people can afford to escape it. And even if you can't really escape. I mean, I've got friends who live in off-grid cabins with no electricity, and they still can't book a ferry ticket without finding an internet connection somewhere. You know, it's almost impossible to live without it. So you just have to set up your own boundaries and decide what they are. And I would strongly recommend that people don't have social media and they don't use smartphones. And there's any number of things you can do, but it depends on what your circumstances are. Some people can't avoid these things. Most of us can't. So you just have to set your boundaries. And I also think that a sane spiritual life, understanding what's going on and having a practice, it's certainly in Christianity, a practice of prayer and going to the liturgy regularly and having a Christian community around you is the thing that's going to keep you sane, actually. That's what carrying the fire looks like to me. One way of doing it anyway, because we're all carrying the fire through this machine world now, this world of kind of lies and dishonesty and very dangerous direction of travel. And so we have to carry a fire. And it's not as if Christians haven't done this before. You know, they had to survive the Roman Empire. All we're in now is a kind of giant technological version of the Roman Empire on a more global scale. So, but I mean, I would say honestly that the central thing for me has been my religious change, my having a prayer life and a kind of spiritual focus. That's the thing that keeps me sane. And that if you have that as your center, then that is what helps you to see what you can and can't do and should and shouldn't do. That's what gives you the kind of guidance, I think, to work out what compromises you make, because we all have to make compromises all the time.
Thank you, Paul Kingsnorth, for being part of Rak Höger.
Thanks for having me on.
Och stort tack till dig som har lyssnat. Gå gärna in och skriv en recension på Apple Podcasts eller i den app där du lyssnar på podden. Och detta är alltså en del av en större publikation på Substack med samma namn som podden. Och den som prenumererar där kan även ta del av de texter jag skriver. Gillar man det man läser och hör får man gärna bli betalande prenumerant för 5 euro i månaden eller 50 om året. Då får man ta del av lite exklusivt extra material också. Du hittar rubbet på ivararpi.se. Och har du några frågor eller synpunkter kan du alltid mejla mig på ivararpi@substack.com. Vi hörs igen.